This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today I am speaking with Dean Pearson, research ecologist with the United States Forest Service. Dean and his colleagues recently developed the Urban Pollinator Matrix, a model municipalities and citizens can use to help threatened pollinators recover.
We hear in the news about all, these bad things happening in the world. What can you as a single individual do is what it fundamentally comes down to, right? And the reality is that in our backyards, we can actually do something about this particular problem.
This is a fascinating example of how science can inform public policy to address real problems. Dean, thanks for joining me.
A pleasure.
So tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
I grew up in western Montana.
Okay.
I was actually born in Missoula. My mom was pretty much a gypsy. She raised four of us kids on her own.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, Missoula in the Bitterroot Valley, up in the Flathead Valley, so a little bit of everywhere in western Montana, yeah.
Yeah, yep. And did you do the entirety of your college and beyond education here at the UM?
I did, yeah. I did my undergrad in wildlife biology here, my master's in zoology, and my PhD in ecology, all here at the U.
What is ecology, and then what does an ecologist study?
Ecology is a study of organisms in their environment. And community ecology is really, like you said, trying to understand how the parts and pieces fit together. So digging in a little bit on what happens if I take this organism out of the system, or say, for instance, if I want to harvest timber, how can I harvest timber in a way that will keep the system intact versus disrupting things, so that we can maximize our ability to partake of resources that we need, right? While minimizing impacts on systems or restoring them after we have, either natural problems or, we go in and we do mining and we restore sites. So that's sort of the applied ecology aspect of things.
Yeah, and so what specifically does a community ecologist consider?
The organisms and how they connect to each other. Really the specifics of what does this organism do in the system? What happens if I remove it? Why is it integral to the system? You're really, when you're doing ecology in an applied context, which I do, you're trying to take the clock apart, understand how all the pieces work, so that you can put it back together, and so that when you see a broken clock, you can understand what's missing and how to go forward.
Okay.
But doing this in the context of conservation and resource management.
We're here to talk about the Urban Pollinator Matrix and the development of that project. But before we do, what is a pollinator? I mean, I think most people think of bees, but it's a broader category of organisms, right?
Right, for sure. A pollinator is something that basically helps plants do their mating process, right? Move the pollen explicitly from one plant to another for reproduction. Pollinators can be bees. That's what we really think about. It can be different kinds of bees, bumblebees. There's all kinds of bees, asocial bees, social bees. It can be butterflies, flies. It can be beetles. There are bats, of course, that do pollination. Mm-hmm. Hummingbirds can be pollinators. But in particular, in our neck of the woods here in Montana, a lot of insects are really key pollinators. And certainly bees, butterflies, and flies.
And are pollinators as a broad category under threat?
There are massive declines going on in
pollinators.
In recent decades, these have really been documented with some long-term data sets. Some cases, they go back 50 years where people have been doing collections, and we have been watching pretty impressive, scary declines in various groups. Bees in particular, butterfly are some of the groups that have been in decline.
And what are some of the factors driving those declines?
Possibly the biggest is habitat transformation, right? So, for instance, just think about the way we do agriculture. I was just in eastern Montana, and if you go far enough into the ag areas over there, and in some areas there's big ag where it's big industrial ag, and it's just like there are wheat fields or whatever you go from field to field, whatever the field is that go for miles and miles, right? And so those used to be prairie habitats, would have supported all kinds of pollinators. Now they're food crops, which is not a negative thing. We need those things, right? That's just a necessary footprint that humans have in the system. but that takes away habitat. And so habitat loss is a big one.
Yep.
Another form of habitat loss is urbanization, and pesticides are another big one, no doubt. And so the pesticides and habitat are probably two of the biggest ones that are going on out there. But there are a number of things going on, and they interact, of course. And when you have one thing on top of another, that can really drive things down.
Sure. Does climate change play a role in any of these declines?
Potentially. Those are the harder ones, right,
Yeah.
to nail down and pin down, again, because that complexity that we just talked about. Whereas it's pretty clear when you put in a massive wheat field that used to be all kinds of flowers, or you put in a big city, right, where there used to be all kinds of plants, you've definitely reduced pollinators.
So let's talk about this project. The Urban Pollinator Matrix is the title of this tool that you've developed, but how did this team come together? What was the genesis of this project?
So the other players on the team are Mary Rose Coleman, who is with Missoula County Ecology and Extension, and she is Missoula's local expert on pollinators, so she's our pollinator expertise. The other person is Allie Depew, and she is with Inspired Classroom, which is a group, an organization that provides all kinds of training resources and education for teachers. Okay. Mary wanted to put together a model for Missoula County of pollinators, to understand pollinators in the city in particular and what's going on with them for conservation purposes. And she wanted to do that using a tool that we had built for a wide range of conservation purposes. So she got together with Allie, who had actually helped me, was part of that other team that was building that tool, that matrix tool. And they started in on putting together this model. And they kept stubbing their toes and coming to me, and they're like, Dean, can you help us out as the creator of this monster? So I looked at what they were trying to do, and I thought, this is pretty cool. But I thought, how about we make this bigger? How about we develop this formally? We publish it in a journal, so it goes through the peer review process, and we make sure that we're, all our I's are dotted. And we do that so that it's a template for any municipality around the state, around the country, presumably around the world, to take that template and copy it, alter it for their community.
Yep.
With the ultimate idea here is to advance pollinator conservation within the cities where we live, right? So maybe we don't want to, we need the big agricultural areas to produce food for us. That's important. And maybe we could do some things there to help pollinators in those systems. But right here in our backyards, there's actually a lot we can do to help pollinators. And so it's a fairly simple habitat to manipulate to increase pollinator services.
And so before we get into the mechanics, one thing we didn't address when we were talking about pollinators and their decline is the decline of pollinators leading to a difficulty for plants reproducing? Is that one of the outcomes associated with this decline that we're concerned about?
There are a lot of outcomes. The one that probably most people are most concerned about is food on your table.
Yeah.
So if you look at the numbers globally, pollinators are critical for over a third of food production around the planet. So that's pretty big. So imagine taking that away. With the way things already are in terms of food resources, and you have some serious food shortages. If you look at different groups of foods, in particular, if you like eating fruit and nuts, those are particularly dependent on pollinators. If you start going beyond that, these are critical groups, right? There's other groups of plants that are food plants for us that they lean on pollinators, right? They don't need them, but you can see declines in production of 10 to 40%. So pretty big deal in terms of food resources, economics around that. And one example that really demonstrates that, I think pretty clearly in my mind, it relates it back to Montana, is that people haul truckloads of honeybee hives to California to provide pollinator services for almond orchards and strawberries and so forth for these again, massive agricultural zones, right, that don't have habitat for pollinators within them, but require those pollinators.
So those zones have made choices to limit or to alter the landscape to grow these crops, and one of the results of those choices has been the decline of pollinators. So now they're having to import pollinator to support the agriculture that they're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's just a natural sort of evolution. It's like industrially agriculture, bigger areas, one big tractor tractor can do it all sort of a thing. But the result of that is you push back all the habitat for those pollinators. And so maybe you get pollination around the edges where you still have some source populations for them, but in the middle of it, you lose it all, and you need those pollinators. And so, so actually importing these critters to do this work. And so right there, you can really see the economic value and importance.
And so Missoula cares about this because there's agricultural interests in the community. There's also citizens that like to garden and do other things, and we have open spaces that we want to keep healthy and so forth. So you can see a variety of ways that Missoula would be interested in doing something like this. Take it from there.
Absolutely. I would like to think any community. I think the way that we pose this is, we hear in the news about all, these bad things happening in the world, whether it's invasive species or loss of pollinators or climate change or whatever it is. And it stresses us out. It's like we want to do something about it, but what can you as a single individual do is what it fundamentally comes down to, right? And the reality is that in our backyards, we can actually do something about this particular problem. And so we wanted to build this tool, this modeling tool, to help people be able to see that in their own backyard and be able to show that, if they so choose, to their city council and help direct, urban projects within a city in a way that can actually benefit these pollinators, which will benefit you immediately in your backyard if you're growing some of your own food, because you'll get, increased pollination, increased seed set and fruit and so forth. But more broadly, we're benefiting these pollinators in general that are needed for, agriculture and natural systems. And we focus on agriculture, or I focused on agriculture in response to your other question earlier, but most flowering plants, right, require pollinators. Not all, but most do. And so just a lot of the nature that you see out there, even if you're not eating it, its roles are dependent on pollinators, and its existence is dependent on pollinators.
So step us through the model. How does it work, and how can the average citizen use it?
We borrowed an approach from social sciences and engineering fields that's been out there for a very long time and been used for a very long time to do something that we have struggled to do in the ecological realm for quite a while. Because in ecology, we tend to use these highly precise quantitative models. And they're great. If you have perfect data, they predict things really well. You can predict population changes in various organisms, right, in a system in response to whatever you're doing out there. But they fundamentally don't work because they break right away. You need to have all kinds of data that you don't have. You need perfect data going in, and there's assumptions that, they don't work very well. So in our effort to try and find tools to improve conservation in a broader sense, we stumbled onto these tools already developed in these other fields that are been used for decades in these other fields and shown to perform pretty well. And in those cases, they're trying to predict human interaction outcomes, social outcomes, things like that, right? Or even engineering outcomes, from a military perspective, should we take out this bridge or not? The enemy's using it, we're using it, modeling these sorts of questions, right, with these tools. And they're called fuzzy cognitive maps.
Fuzzy cognitive maps. That's a great term.
Yeah, and it really depicts what you're doing. You're really they're bubbles with lines connecting them, and you're trying to understand, because there's system dynamics, right? And if I poke one of those bubbles, not just the one next to it moves, but other ones do, right?
Okay.
And so these are the more complicated outcomes that can happen. And so they're trying to understand questions very similar to our questions, but in the social sciences.
Okay.
And so our bubbles are now animals. Pollinators are some of those bubbles. Plants are some of those bubbles, right? In the case of the urban pollinator setting, your monoculture lawn is one of those bubbles. And so now we can ask questions about, what if we go into our backyard and we, for instance, just quit mowing? If we shoot our mower in the head and we throw out our pesticides, our herbicides, and we let our yard go wild.
This all sounds like my yard.
Yeah. No, and this is all of our yards, but we quantified that. How much is it helping, right? Because part of the question here is, what are the best approaches to get the most effective outcomes? If we're going to try and help these pollinators, to show that you can help them in your backyard first, right? And how? Like, how can I best do this? And so along those lines, one of the ideas out there is people have been increasingly becoming aware of what we just talked about, the importance of pollinators for things we really care about, and wanting to help, is this idea of no mow May. So the idea here is just for the month of May, if we could convince folks to, put the lawnmower away and let things go wild, we'll help some pollinators. And this is the idea, and it's been pushing around. People have been, doing this, right? Implementing it, and it's a fun idea.
We'll be back to my conversation with Dean Pearson after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com. Hey folks, coming up on October 4th, we're excited to bring you another live event, this time in collaboration with Climate Smart Missoula. Not the dark ages, climate science continues despite the attacks, is a conversation with Amy Martin, creator of the Peabody Award-winning Threshold podcast, and Christopher Preston, award-winning author of several great books, including his most recent, Tenacious Beasts. Join us at 5 p.m. on October 4th at the Confluence Center in Missoula. For more information, visit missoulaclimate.org.
This is Sam Schultz, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with Forest Service ecologist Dean Pearson about the threat to pollinators and what we can do about it. And that was one of the prescriptions that your model helped quantify, basically, the efficacy of?
Exactly.
Okay.
So in creating this template and publishing it, we wanted to have examples in there that were illustrative. And so we put two conservation scenarios that people could do in their backyard. We competed them against each other, right?
Okay.
One is the no mow May, although we extended that all through the summer. Like, just shoot your lawnmower in the head, throw out your herbicide.
Stop mowing.
Let it go wild.
Don't care about a lawn.
Exactly. All season. What happens to the pollinators if you do that? The alternative scenario was, well, what if you just go in and plant some native plants out there? People do horticultural plantings all over. You see them all over the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what if we just got folks that are already doing that to add some native plants or switch to native plants? What happens if we do that? So those are the two scenarios. We modeled those out, and what the model predicts is that, yes, if you do the no mow May thing, if you shoot your lawnmower in the head, you start getting dandelions and clover and all kinds of things popping up in your backyard, and that does help the pollinators because grass doesn't do much for them, right? Grass is wind pollinated, okay? So that does help them. We see all of the pollinator groups that we looked at go up a bit. We see honeybees go up the most, okay? Honeybees are great. They're really important. As I just talked about, they get employed to do work in California, and they've had some problems as well. But they're not the ones that are really being threatened by decline because we provide habitat for honeybees, right?
Sure.
So, but honeybees are really generalists. So dandelions are just fine for them. Clover is wonderful, and they're happy with pretty much any flowering plant you put out there. So we do see increases across the board for pollinators, but they're small, and they're mostly for the honeybees. In the other scenario, when we provide native plants, and this can just be borders along your yard, you could put some potted plants on your deck. It doesn't have to be transitioning your entire lawn, and that wasn't what we modeled. We just modeled just adding, native plants like you would with your standard horticultural plants, right? And we ask, all right, what happens here? Well, here again, we see a bump. All of the 5 groups of pollinators we looked at, butterflies, other, bees, bumblebees, and so forth, they all get a bump, but the honeybees get the weakest bump, and all these other species that are actually struggling get the biggest bump.
Interesting.
Yeah. And when you look at why, it's not too surprising because a lot of our native pollinators, many pollinating species are generalists to some degree, and many actually can have some pretty tight relationships with native species. Mm-hmm. And so if you provide native plants, you're providing the explicit food, right, for these organisms in their habitat, and it just gives a bigger bump to them. And the honeybees, they'll take that stuff too because they'll take anything, right? But they just don't bump up quite as much as the other species.
And so those are the two scenarios you pitted against one another in the paper. What other sorts of interventions might the model inform that a homeowner could do?
There are all kinds of things, right? And it doesn't have to be pollinators that you're modeling either. Maybe
Right.
you like backyard birds, and maybe you want native birds, chickadees, and other native species that are your fancy, orioles or whatever it is that you want in your backyard. You'd have to build a different model. This model wasn't designed for that. You'd have to alter the model.
So there's not a website yet at Missoula County where somebody can go.
Well,
and
there's
say
a
that.
website where you can go and find this model,
Yes.
and you could deploy this model for the specific question that we did. You could tweak it to ask some different questions, like what if I put flowers that bloomed all summer versus just this period of summer, right?
Okay.
But if you want to take that very same model and change it to ask different questions, let's focus on birds now. You're going to have to change some parameters, some of the nodes or the bubbles, and some of the linkages in there, and the parameterization of those linkages. And you can do that from the literature. You can do that a lot of different ways. That's why these qualitative models are so nice. They don't break in the real world, and you can use all kinds of data that can be, it could be anything from really highly precise data for some of the nodes to pretty qualitative data for other nodes. Like we know that butterflies like this flower more than this flower. So just higher versus lower,
Sure,
qualitative parameterization. And in some cases, it may just be expert opinion, right, that you're putting in there. As long as you're categorically right, the models actually can perform pretty well, and we've tested them in complex systems in terms of predicting outcomes.
So we've talked about various scenarios in the paper, letting your lawn grow out versus native plants. I mean, I could see a homeowner, getting on board with native plants, but I could see myself getting on board with not mowing my lawn ever again. But I think my neighbors might not be too keen on that. How do citizens take this information and put it into action?
Right. So that's kind of the end product, is not just that the native plants did more, but that you have two alternatives here, right? And for some folks, maybe I've been looking for an excuse to not mow my lawn, and this is it. This is perfect. I can help pollinators, and I can spend that time doing something else. That's great. And so it works. That works. And so, but it might not work for everyone, right? If I live in a homeowners association area where that's just not going to fly, then that doesn't work so well. I'll upset some neighbors, right? On the other hand, planting native flowers, probably not going to upset too many people. Many people won't know whether they're native or horticulturals, right? There's usually not ordinances against that sort of thing. So you can do that, and it's pretty easy to do in just, just flower bed on the side, some potted plants here and there. You do that with the right plants, and you'll immediately see, boom, you have all these native pollinators coming. You'll get bumblebees in your backyard. You can sit and watch, and I do this now with some penstemons in my backyard. I watch mason bees and bumblebees and all these wonderful sweat bees and stuff coming in, and they're amazing colors and just crazy behaviors, and it's cool.
And had you thought about this outcome for your own home before this project, or is this a new insight for you watching this come to life as you described it?
It is an accelerated insight for me. So I have a certain amount of native plants. I like plants, and I study native plants. And so I have a certain amount in my backyard, but not enough. And this project I have really started this year. I've added quite a few native plants to my backyard because I'm very much enjoying watching these pollinator interactions and seeing how I can have this big effect. One other application that we've been exploring is that there is a praying mantis invasion going on in western Montana.
Really? So praying mantises, where are they native to?
So these are European praying mantises.
Oh, wow.
Okay, they have been hanging around in western Montana for a long time, in the sense that people can buy these at the greenhouse and put them in their garden as a pest control, right?
Interesting.
Okay, and that's probably how they got going here. But recently, and we've been watching this on iNaturalist, and people, I don't know if you've seen this yourself, but I discovered it accidentally. My daughter discovered it accidentally. Lots of people, there was this kind of this buzz of people finding praying mantises in the last 5 years. And really since 2018, they've really been ramping up, except that the last couple years, they fell down to about half of what they peaked at. And we think that's due to winter cold. And we think what's going on basically is people have been doing this as backyard biocontrol for a long time, but the winters have been softening.
Okay.
And
they're
so
coming back.
They're starting to establish on their own. So normally you have to introduce them. They die off in the winter. You have to reintroduce them the next year, right? But now they're establishing wild populations, self-sustaining populations, and they're really ramping up.
And what's wrong with having praying mantises in Montana?
To be clear, we do have a couple native species. They're very small and diminutive, and probably nobody's ever seen them. Most folks haven't seen them. But these guys are big. These are the big praying mantises, right? They're not quite as big as the Chinese mantises, but they're 4 inches long, I'd say. Yeah.
That's a big bug.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest bug that we have. It's bigger than any of our natives. So think about that perspective. This is a predator. As most people know, these things are predators. They'll eat pretty much anything they can. If it moves and they think they can wrestle it down, they'll take it.
Wow.
So they're killing machines. They're amazing, creatures, but they weren't here before, and they're the top dog in terms of size.
Okay, so we've got a problem with praying mantids. How do we apply you and your colleagues' model to addressing this problem?
Right. So a very different application of the tool, right? We're not seeing how we can benefit pollinators in our backyards. We're asking the question, is this a real problem that we need? Because when exotic species come in and start taking over, you've got to get on it right away.
Right.
That's the time to do something effectively. Otherwise, the cost goes up, the effort goes up, and usually control success goes down. So that's the question is are these things a problem now? Are they going to be a problem? So we built a model. We asked these questions, and the answer the model has given us, and these are predictions, right? The models are as good as the data that you have supporting them. If it's really good data, they can do pretty well. If it's bad data, bad in, bad out. But the models predict that right now, manatid populations that we have, especially after this drop that we had after a couple of bad winter spells, doesn't seem to be doing much. They're okay right now. But if you start ramping up their abundance, we start seeing effects on a number of invertebrate groups, and they can get pretty substantial. And we've even seen second-order effects on birds. There's potential negative effects on birds as well, primarily because the mantises are affecting foods of birds. A lot of birds eat things like grasshoppers, or butterflies, things like that.
And the mantids are wiping those things
out.
The
mantids are good at eating these things, right?
Yeah.
And so there's actually potential for them to get abundant enough to actually bump up and affect birds. But what we see is that if we get winter cold snaps, there's been empirical studies where if you put these things in a freezer and you turn it down low enough to like minus 20, the eggs don't survive well through the winter. So that's part of the reason we think that the warmer winters may be helping them get going. But these parasitoids, again, have pretty good, they can really take out a lot of the eggs, and they can be pretty good control measures. And so we might have a natural control that could come in. But so the story is right now, not a big deal. They could get to be a big deal. We have an understanding of what those densities might be for them to get to be a problem, so that we know that we want to watch for that cutoff point and jump on it. And these are some of the controls that are affecting it. So the model helps inform us about, where are we at in this invasion and how might we respond to this invader going forward.
Fascinating. Dean, I love this because, you are deep in the weeds, maybe quite literally, as a scientist, yet you're working in such a way that you can take the science that is far beyond what the average citizen can comprehend, but make it useful for the average citizen. If folks want to learn more about the urban pollinator matrix, your work in general, where would you direct them?
You can go onto the internet and type in MPG matrix. As we publish the new material, we put the new models on there. You can copy that, template it, and build new models from those examples.
Fantastic. Thanks for telling us about it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Keely Larson is our producer. Libby Riddle is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music, and Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.